Hey, I don't know if you guys have heard or not, but Valve released a new game. It's called Deadlock, a new 6v6 third-person MOBA that 100% never got leaked, nobody knew anything about, and was only shown to the world for the first time yesterday when the developers lifted the fog of war, allowing people to stream and make YouTube videos about it, essentially launching the game into early access. So, now that Deadlock functionally exists for the purpose of critique, this is my far too early review and impressions of Deadlock. Hi, how's it going? My name is LionHeartZ. I typically do Counter-Strike related content, but I definitely have interest in this third-person MOBA space. I loved games like the now defunct Paragon, rest in peace, and the recently revived Gigantic, as I've personally found these versions of the MOBA genre more agreeable to my personal preferences, as I've never really liked the top-down perspective of League of Legends and the overly complicated nature of Dota. So on first impression, Deadlock certainly seems like something that's right up my alley, and now that I've had a chance to play it over the last day and a half or so, I definitely have some thoughts, I have some concerns, but overall my first impressions are very good. I think there's a lot to like here, a lot of potential, and as usual, despite the many valid criticisms of Valve as a company, the one thing that they absolutely do well, outside of Artifact, is release games that feel very smooth, very polished, and very fun to play right out the gate. There isn't a whole lot of early access jank. There's not like weird movement glitching, hitbox issues, the movement around the map feels good, the way that you play the heroes, their abilities all feel very fun to engage with, the fights are frantic and frenetic, and while in the bigger team fights it can certainly get very complicated to know what's going on around you, the more you play the game, the more you're able to recognize what's going on and respond in kind. So if you're looking for a TLDR, would I recommend trying out Deadlock? I would. I think the game has a lot to offer if you're a fan of the MOBA space, and it does well to kind of bridge the gap between more typical hero shooters like an Overwatch or a TF2 to appeal to those who maybe haven't dipped their toes into the MOBA genre yet. Before we get any further into the specifics, I'd like to take a second and ask you guys to leave a like, leave a comment down below, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It helps out immensely in the YouTube algorithm, so thank you for doing it. While you're down there, consider becoming a channel member. For $5 a month, you can support me directly in what we do here, gain access to videos like this the night before anyone else, and a shout out at the end of every video. And lastly, check me out on twitch.tv/LionHeartZ2. Later tonight, I will be streaming Deadlock, and after every game, I will be letting people add me on Steam, and I will be inviting people so they can get access to the game as well. So if you're looking for a code, join me on stream and I'll help you get in. And without any further ado, let's get on with the rest of the review. Okay, so what is there in Deadlock right now? Well, Deadlock, like I said, is a 6v6 third-person MOBA. As of right now, there is just public matchmaking. There is a sandbox to test everything in the game. There is a public bot queue for practice, as well as a private bot queue for practice. There is currently one giant 4-lane map, and 21 heroes available right away with no unlock restrictions. The first thing that stands out to me as a bit odd is that there are no roles in the game. The heroes aren't filtered into certain archetypes like tank or damage dealer or support, and when you queue up, there aren't any dedicated roles in the matchmaking either. When you boot up, you're assigned to a random lane, and you just play that lane that's given to you or roam around the map to help your teammates. So there are no limitations on team comps. You can bring as many tank characters, stun characters, support characters, or whatever else you like to a game. It's all dependent on whatever you're granted in matchmaking or whatever you decide to do in a pre-made group. On the surface, I definitely like this because you aren't forced to play any particular archetype unless you really want to, and it means there's a lot of variety in the team comps you both play in and play against. However, as an early negative, something we'll touch on more in just a bit, I am worried about the balance of certain compositions this early on. Obviously, balance is 100% subject to change as the game is ever evolving, but on its surface, the most annoying games I have played so far were against teams that stacked a lot of characters that could spam stuns repeatedly. It made teamfights very obnoxious because you would be chain stunned for multiple seconds, and even though the game offers items you can buy in the shop that reduce debuffs, if those debuffs are just reapplied one after another, it kind of defeats the purpose of the item. Now, I'm 100% biased as stuns tend to be my least favorite part of games like this, so I'm usually anti-stun in most scenarios, and I want them to be used with caution. I understand that not everyone agrees with that, and there are some players who love having a variety of CC options within a game like this. I just hope that the devs take a careful hand in how much and how frequent CC can be applied in the game, especially in the later parts of it. Stepping back a little bit, we'll save the rest of that balance discussion for a little bit later on. Let's talk more about actually playing the game. when you select and you want to actually boot up a game for the first time, you'll be faced with a champion select screen. And unlike most games where you would just like pick your hero and start the game, here you pick a number of heroes, you can set their priority, and then enter queue. And when you launch the game, you'll be randomly selected into one of those heroes you highlighted. So you don't necessarily have complete control over who you get to play every game, but you have some control. As of right now, the specifics of how you are assigned a hero every game are not known, as best as I can tell. But from what I've experienced so far, if you select a hero as high priority, which is the purple outline you see on Yamato on the far right, if there's no one else on your team that is also high priority Yamato, you should be assigned that character pretty much every single time. What I'm not clear on is if 2 or more people have a hero selected as high priority, what happens in that case? Who gets to play the one that they want to play? It appears to be random, but there's no definitive answer on that. Now, as a system for new players, I personally don't like this, because I think people are going to want to pick a character and learn how to play one specifically out the gate just to get comfortable with the game. And since you have to pick at least 3, and you aren't necessarily guaranteed to get the one you want, you might find new players who have only played one game and want to try again on that same hero, having to learn a whole new kit while they're still getting comfortable with the basic controls of the game. Just on the surface, it doesn't feel like the most new user-friendly system for hero select, and I would much prefer that like you pick an assortment of heroes, then you get into the game, and then you could draft team compositions like in other MOBAs. That way you can see what the enemy's going to pick, and then you can pick what you think will best suit your team, or try to counterpick somebody else. I like that kind of system more, and maybe that will be coming with the ranked version of Deadlock, which currently isn't released yet, and we're just looking at what the casual system might be. That's definitely possible. Regardless, once you've selected the heroes that you want to play, you load into a game for the first time and you start, you're going to be faced with probably the most complicated system in the game by far, and that's the item shop. And the item shop I definitely think is going to be the biggest new player barrier, because it's very complicated, very daunting, and knowing what to build for what character is not very easily told to you. We're switching over here live commentary style. I'm currently in the sandbox mode with Great Talon, who is an archer character, damage dealer. I've played 1 or 2 games with them, very fun so far. But here's the thing, I'm playing a game. What do I build for this character? I go up here to the item shop, and you are faced with, here are some default builds, which gives you some default items you might want to buy in the early game, the big game, and the late game. We're like, okay, maybe I want to build something for myself. You go over to the weapon tab, and you are faced with a whole lot of options, with a whole lot of text, and you have to decide for yourself very quickly, okay, well, what do I want? What's going to be best for this character? Is this character going to want to build heavily into his weapons first, or maybe into player survivability, or into spirit damage, which is all of the like ability and magic damage that some characters do more heavily than their weapon damage? The one mistake that I made in my first couple of games was I was spreading my money, my economy, over all 3 tabs kind of equally, when it's pretty much correct for each character to pick like one lane and focus that lane into the later upgrades first, instead of spreading evenly. And I feel like the game doesn't really relay that information very well, at least not yet. Now, as an aside, I didn't realize this when I was recording that earlier bit, so we're just going to throw it in now for the sake of transparency. I had never clicked browse builds in the buy menu, because frankly, when you're buying stuff in game, it's hectic, you're making decisions so you can get back into combat. I had no idea that if you hit browse builds, you get community made builds that are public and also have ratings, so you can see what's highly rated within the community. Or, and I believe this is currently disabled, you can build your own builds in the menu and save them. That way you have a highlighted path for what you want to buy, and you don't have to skim all of these different tabs to find what you need. This is definitely a lot better than my first impressions of the buy system, and I would definitely take advantage of this if you're a new player. Obviously, you kind of have to do some trial and error to find a build that might suit your playstyle, but the fact that these are here, and like, you know, like this one's got 40,000 likes, so it probably is pretty good. You know, that should at least get you going down the right path. And I wish I had known about this earlier, before I had actually played many of my games. Definitely comes back to kind of the broader point, which is that the game is definitely complicated and very, at least in my opinion, not very new user friendly, at least right now. I hope that it gets better over time, and with community resources you can definitely learn the game fast, but man, you're going to be a fish out of water for your first couple of games until you get your feet wet. But hey, that could also just be a byproduct of MOBAs in general, and may not necessarily be something that's specific to Deadlock. Alright, we've been beating around the bush about this, let's just go ahead and talk about balance, or at least my perception of the balance so far. I have to state right away, I'm not very good at this game. I have not played it enough to be an expert on the ins and outs of the current meta. There are tons of people who probably have played a lot more of this game than I have, who may have a much better read on the meta going into it. So these are just my impressions as of right now, and obviously, once again, subject to change. So out the gate, I personally haven't felt like any one champion was super overbearing to deal with, but there is one combination of heroes that right now seems way too strong to me, and that's the combination of Hayes and Ivy. Ivy is a support character who has an ability that can grant increased rate of fire to their allies based on line of sight. And Hayes is a character that's great at dealing a lot of single target damage because one of Hayes' abilities grants her damage ramp up on hit. So if she can stack damage even faster with a higher fire rate, she can out DPS what feels like pretty much anybody in a 1v1. And this seems most problematic to me in the early game when you have the least amount of your kit available to you. Those early lane fights against an Ivy Hayes duo feel very lopsided because if you overextend or take too much chip damage, the Ivy Hayes can push and pretty much guaranteed win that fight every single time, it feels like. Their damage output, to me, feels so much higher than what any other champion or group of champions could do as of right now, because they're just using base weapon damage and the scaling from Hayes' kit to just out DPS you. You don't have any bullet resistance, you don't have heals or peel abilities really yet, and you don't have your own damage online yet to be able to counter it. You're often just with your base weapon damage. So Hayes just automatically outscales you, and it feels very unfair to fight against. I've had multiple games so far where I had to go into an Ivy Hayes duo in my lane and have to deal with getting absolutely trounced in the early game because they had so much more damage output than I could possibly muster. And if you have the superiority to win the early game, you can scale into the mid game. You have the economy advantage. All of a sudden you're snowballing, and now you, as the person who's receiving this combo, doesn't have any recourse to try and counteract that and try and get back that economy advantage. It starts to scale out of control really quickly. So that combo to me seems too strong right off the rip. The other thing that I'm concerned about is that without there being any kind of role queue or dedicated roles in the game, stacking stuns does feel like the most dominant strategy. I feel like the games that I've lost the hardest were against teams that had like an Abrams, a Dynamo, a Moe and Krill paired with like a Seven and a Hayes, and that combination of single target damage and then chain stuns made the team fights honestly kind of miserable to fight because you would peek out, and even if you were with your team, you just weren't allowed to play the game. Moe and Krill has a disarm and a stun, Dynamo has a stun and then an ultimate that pulls everybody in and then stuns, Abram has a leap and a stun, like it just Seven has a stun. Once you start getting to the point that you're playing whole team competitions where every single character has a stun, it starts to get really annoying because again, I don't like stuns. Other than that, I haven't really picked up a character I haven't tried before and be like, this is kind of just not fun to play. All the characters feel interesting, they have unique abilities, and honestly that's kind of hard to find in the hero MOBA space nowadays, as it feels like every new game kind of recycles the same core set of abilities. Even the ones in Deadlock that feel most familiar or similar to other games feel unique in the context of how it works into the broader kit of the characters. All of the characters feel very unique. Even your traditional characters, like a sniper character like Vindicta, feels different than other sniper characters in similar games because instead of always having access to a scoped high damage shot, her ultimate is the high damage sniper shots, and she can get 2 or sometimes 3 of them, and if she wastes them, they go on cooldown. She still plays like a normal DPS character outside of her ability to fly and occasionally snipe for high damage. So far, I would say my favorite 2 heroes to play have been Yamato and Lash because I like the playstyle of a high mobility character that likes to jump in, isolate a single target for big damage, and play kind of a pick strategy. Yamato plays that to a plum. She's obviously the katana character, she only speaks in Japanese, her bio is completely in Japanese, and I'm a weeb, so I appreciate that. And her ability to just find that one person, seek them out, and say, no, fuck you, definitely appeals to me. Lash does that even better with his ability to grapple to opponents, then hit them with a knock-up stun, and then lash them for big damage, and then his weapon damage starts to rack up big time. I just like the feel of those 2 to specifically. So overall, as a core set of heroes off the rip, I think there's a good balance of characters that are easy and approachable and characters that are more complex and take time to learn. There's a good variety right away, and outside of some edge cases, it feels like you can pick pretty much anyone and be able to have a good time and not really feel like it's weak or underpowered compared to what else is on the board. Overall, I've definitely enjoyed my time with Deadlock thus far, and there's certainly a lot more specifics we could get into, like interactions with the game itself, how you maneuver through the game, the different stages of the game, lane control versus picking off in the jungles, versus going for mid in the Rejuvenator, etc. The game is exceedingly complex, with a lot of replayability already, with more yet to come, and honestly, I think Valve have a banger on their hands as they continue to refine the balance, polish the game, and work on the optimization. One thing that I probably should have noted earlier is that the game doesn't really run that well, especially if you're on a lower tier system, but I would expect that to improve over time. Overall, would I recommend that you play Deadlock? Yes. And unlike Artifact, I think Valve have a brand new game on their hands that might have some staying power going into the future. Anyways, that is my first impression, my thoughts on Deadlock. Let me know what you guys think of the game in the comments down below. Have you gotten a chance to play it? Are you only watching others play it while you try and hunt down an invite code? Let me know and I'll be down there responding as always. This is definitely a departure for me content-wise, as I usually cover Counter-Strike, specifically the tournament and esports side of things. So if that interests you, make sure you check out my channel, check out some of my other videos, and subscribe for more content coming your way. These videos are powered by Advanced.gg. Check out their website in the description down below, browse their excellent products, and if you decide to make a purchase, use my code LIONS10 at checkout for 10% off. It lets them know that I sent you their way. Thank you to Advanced.gg. Shout out to my channel members, Justin, Jesse, Furley, Bubblesj, and Dr. Cocktor for keeping the lights on. If you want to become a channel member, check out the link in the description as well. While you're down there, follow me on Twitch. Like I said, we'll be streaming more Deadlock, Counter-Strike, all that good stuff. And that's going to be it for me today, guys. You have a wonderful day, and I'll see you soon in another one. Peace.